Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff here. It is Wednesday, April 8th, I believe. Alright, it is. All the days run together. I don't know what to do for you. I try to keep them organized and put the... look, I didn't do my tie this morning. I try to go through and label them by days so that you can keep up. Hopefully that's helpful to you. All right, so today we're going to finish talking about the New Deal and basically how America was starting to move out of the Great Depression. It is worth stating, as we've been talking about the Great Depression this whole time, what really brings us out of the Great Depression is December 7th, 1941, which is the attack on Pearl Harbor. So throughout the 1930s with the FDR, we had been on a trajectory going up and up and up, and everything had been getting better. However, we were still way below where we were in the 1920s. The moment Japan attacks us, which if you don't know anything about it yet, that's fine. We haven't talked about it. That's all next unit of World War II. When Japan attacks us, everybody didn't have jobs in the Great Depression. All of a sudden, all our factories get opened back up so that we can go back to work. When that happens, that's what's going to officially bring us out of the Great Depression. But we're going to talk more today about how we are coming out of the Great Depression. All right. So what we're going to talk about today, let me move myself up here a little bit, is the greater equality that happened under FDR's time in office. So prior to FDR, the Democrats were the conservative party. The Republicans were the liberal party. Now, for this class as a survey course, it's really easy for me to just point out, like, they just switch team names, and for the most part, that is fine. It's actually a longer process of which the Democrats today in 2020 are considered the liberal party, and the Republicans are considered the conservative party. That it's a longer process. It's really from like 1930s up through the Civil Rights Movement, which is in the 1960s. Through that time period, you're going to see them change. But for this class, since it's a survey course, understanding that this is the big switch is when it's going to start happening. No human in America changed their political views. All right, I think that's important to say that people that are conservative remain conservative. People that are liberal remain liberal. What ends up happening, though, is people that were conservative, that were Democrats, all right, start realizing that the Democrats don't seem very conservative anymore, and the Republicans are more conservative than the Democrats, and they start switching from being Democrats to being Republicans. The political parties changed, not like necessarily people, but that's going to really start here, and here's why. So FDR, he is a Democrat. The conservative party. So there's a large amount, even though he's from New York, there's a large amount of Democrats that are in the South. The majority of the South is staunch Democrats. So FDR is the first person to put a woman as a female cabinet member. All right, as Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor. All right, when he does this, I don't know how much blowback he's going to get by conservatives. He probably got some. But the thing that's going to absolutely set off a lot of the 1930s level, because racism was still extremely prevalent, so segregation, all of those stuff in the South, is when he appoints a black woman to his cabinet. All right, Mary McLeod Bethune. She was hired by FDR to head the Division of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Council. So he has 12 cabinet members, one of which is black. So, logically, it's called the Black Cabinet. Like, that's how extreme things got. Like, it was like, you're talking about his Black Cabinet. Like, not his brain trust, his Black Cabinet, because he has one black person on his cabinet. If that alone doesn't show you the level of focus that gets put on race in America at the time, I mean, I don't know what else would. So, a lot of Democrats who at the time were in the South very against this, and they're going to break off from the National Democratic Party politically. Even though everybody still likes FDR, because FDR is really helping everybody out, so he never really sees a lot of this negativity. But we're getting ready to talk about, before I jump into that, he also appoints John Collier as the head of Indian Affairs. Now, America has treated Indians just absolutely horrifically throughout the beginning of time. And you're like, oh, look at FDR trying to be a good guy, finally taking care of some Indians. So the Indian Affairs and the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 was, in theory, designed to be really, really good and positive for Indians. It will eventually, by the 1970s, be incredibly corrupt, and they have to gut it and start all over. It is worth mentioning. Do you know why all of a sudden in 1934 they care about Indians? Guess what right they got in 1927? They got the right to vote. Now, keep in mind, they're the very first people here. Slavery ended in the 1860s. Women got the right to vote in 1919. It's not until 1927, the very first humans that existed here in America got the right to vote. Once they get the right to vote, let's care about them. And he creates the Department of Indian Affairs, which again was designed to be a very positive thing. However, it ends up being very corrupt by the 1970s, and everybody hates it. So the New Deal coalition, this is important to understand. All right, this is a big change for the Democrats. All right, drastic different change for the Democrats. The New Deal coalition is the term given to all the minorities. If every white male in the United States voted against FDR, he would still win re-election, because all the minorities combined, women, black people, Native Americans, all the minorities combined make up the majority. And that is called the New Deal coalition at the time. So he had massive support across the board. Now, most white males supported him as well. Like he was a very, very popular president because he had a clear method of how he was going to move through this Great Depression. This is Frances Perkins here on the left. Like, hey, let's get a picture for you. First woman cabinet. Go outside in the alley and stand next to the escape ladder. It just doesn't seem like a very good place to take a picture at. This is Mary McLeod Bethune, who was the first African-American on the cabinet, and she was also a woman. This is John Collier with his completely not awkward picture of two Native Americans. I feel like right before, I mean, that's some high waters right there. But I do feel like right before this picture, these Indians are like, do not take my picture. And then he took their picture. Like, you can tell there's literally no small talk that took place between these men. Just really unhappy picture. And the pants, man, that makes me uncomfortable. All right. Unions. So, unions are getting stronger. The Congress of Industrial Organizations. So, when the factory shut down, all right, and Eugene Debs was put in jail for talking junk about World War I. The industrial workers of the world had kind of fallen apart. The American Federation of Labor had fallen apart. There's a lot of struggles with unions. In the Great Depression, they come out and make a new mega union, and it's called the Congress of Industrial Organizations. It is basically like the new industrial workers of the world union that comes out in the Great Depression. This is a picture of the first meeting of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Now, like, oh, that's a lot of guys. Cool. Each one of those men represent 5,000 workers. That is an absolute ton of workers that are being represented here in their first meeting. All right. Culture in the New Deal. This stuff is cool. All right. So during the New Deal era in the 1930s, here's some cultural stuff. People loved movies. Absolutely loved movies. Going to movies was like the greatest thing in the world that you could do. It was dirt cheap and everybody went. Typically, until recently when ticket prices are like $10 a ticket, historically when the recession's really bad, movies do really well because people go to movies to escape what their current life is like. But then now movie tickets are so crazy expensive, that's not really a thing as much anymore. But Gone with the Wind, so people love going to see movies, and the biggest movie at the time was Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is based on pre-Civil War the South. So even though it came out in the 30s, it was still like based in like the 1860s, basically, or during the Civil War, basically showing like how glorious life was like before the Civil War. There are some issues with that whole premise, but so it is the biggest movie at the time. Popcorn had come out. People realized if you just set a kernel of popcorn on fire, it'll pop up. And does anybody ever want like can you not do that with like other seeds? Like why does the popcorn seeds or the kernels like pot? Is there nothing else that you can? Whatever. All right. So Gone with the Wind, very famous movie in the 1930s. All right. So this is absolutely mind blowing. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie. There's a bunch of them called The War of the Worlds. It's actually a book. Like I'm looking around like I'm in my classroom because I have a little copy of it. War of the Worlds. It's a book written by a guy named Orson Welles. All right. So Orson Welles, written by a guy named H.G. Wells. All right. Orson Welles is another guy we're getting ready to talk about. So The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds is a little book written by H.G. Wells. In the book, what happens is Martians invade the Earth in these big metal machines, all right? Then they go around and start grabbing people up and like eating them, the big metal machines, all right? And everybody's freaking out like, what are we going to do? Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then, spoiler alert, what ends up happening at the end is humans have no way of stopping it. But what ends up defeating all the Martians is the general bacteria that exists on our planet they're not used to. It's like they all got taken out by the coronavirus. So they all end up just naturally dying, and that's what saves Earth is like our diseases that we're immune to. So that is kind of the basis of the book. Very famous book. They make it in a bunch of movies. Tom Cruise made a version of it 5, 6, 10 years ago, called War of the Worlds, in which it's just a remake. It's a very, very common book. It had come out in the early 1900s. Everybody, tons of comics and everything. Well, the reason this is relevant here in the 1930s is one of the biggest ways of being entertained at the time was through radio programs. So if you've never heard a radio program, they are super awesome. Radio programs mean like an entire like show on the radio. With the sound effects and everything, it's super cool. And I'm surprised podcasts haven't really committed to it as well. And maybe they have, and I'm just oblivious to it. So the best radio broadcaster, actor, voice actor around is a guy named Orson Welles. He is the absolute best radio broadcaster around. Everybody loves him. All stuff is great. He can do all these voices. He's fantastic. He's very skilled. So Orson Welles decides he is going to make a radio version of the War of the Worlds during the 1930s. However, he's like reading a book. I mean, it's a super common. I mean, it'd be like Cinderella or Snow White. Like it's a story that everybody knows, all right? So he's like, I want to do it differently than other people have done it because everybody's done their own version of it. So what he decides to do, all right, and it's kind of cutting edge. He's like, here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to present it like it's just a radio program that's playing music, all right? So it's like a 2-hour thing where people are going to play music of like symphony music. And then we're going to keep interrupting it like it's a news broadcast being like, oh my gosh, the Martians have invaded America. What are we going to do? Oh my gosh. And then go back to the music, all right? And then break back in and be like, oh my gosh, the Martians have killed everybody in New Jersey. What are we going to do? And then like goes back to the music and just keeps breaking in as like a news bulletin. And he's like, oh, this is cool. So the day he's going to do this, he goes through and tells everybody before they start, hey, everybody, this is War of the Worlds. It's fictional. Everything's good. And then he starts the program. And it goes like right according to plan. It's awesome. I'm sure you can look it up on the internet and listen to it. It's a really impressively done. So he does the program, ends the program. That's fine. He goes home that night, goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning and reads the newspaper. And his life fundamentally changes. So people in America can be stupid. A lot of people listening to that program did not know that it was fake. I mean, baffling, all right? They thought it was real. There were actual families who killed themselves that night during the program. So, because they would rather kill themselves than have their brains sucked out by Martians, all right? And it is like people absolutely like went ballistic, having no idea that this thing was fake. Orson Welles, absolutely like it broke him. I got a video clip here in a little bit, and you can see him, like they're interviewing him after that, and he's a very charismatic, like kind of guy, and you can see like he never recovers from this. He feels very guilty for this, because people didn't know. Well, it's such a great program, and this gets even more ridiculous. And you can go Google and Wikipedia it if you want. So it is a really, really good program. Like, it's a great idea. Other countries have all done this after him, like the same way with the music, breaking in with, oh my gosh, is this happening? Every single country, there's a massive, massive issue with it. And everybody, like, you can tell them 1,000 times, months in advance, this is all fake, it's all fake, it's all fake. And every time you do it, it absolutely just, up until the 1970s, and they just, I think 1970s was one of the last time that it was done. And you can go look it up. There's a country, it was an African country, I want to say, in the 1970s, and they told them way in advance this is fake. They went through and did it, and by the end of the program, their government had been overthrown because they had not done enough to stop the Martian invasion. So you can go Wikipedia that or Google that one. I don't remember what the name of the country is, but it's like, what? So they don't really... It's just the thing. But Orson Welles the book is written by H.G. Wells, no relation to Orson Welles, who was the actor who did this War of the Worlds thing, and it really traumatized him, and it was a huge issue in the 1930s. People literally killed themselves over this program. Grant Wood, he made let me see, how far can I just whip over to it? All right, so Grant Wood is a painter who painted American Gothic. Unless you're like in art history, you probably don't know what American Gothic is, but I'm going to show you the picture and you've absolutely seen it before. And then Richard Wright is a writer, wrote Native Son. And John Steinbeck is a writer who wrote The Grapes of Wrath, which is talking about the Okies, which is not a moose. All right, as they travel from Oklahoma to California trying to find work, and it's a very famous book that got written in the 1930s. Let me show you American Gothic here real quick. I'll go back to the other ones. This is American Gothic. You've probably seen this. It's supposed to show the plainness of life in the 1930s. There's no frills or anything like that in the 1930s. All right, this is Gone with the Wind. Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh were kind of I'm so old, like I gotta change up my analogies. Like it's the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie of the time. Now y'all are like, oh, you mean them old people? So I don't really know who like this is like the best looking guy and best actor and like best looking girl. I don't know anybody anymore. All right, so this is a video clip of Orson Welles being pretty traumatized when they interview him the next day.
Radio listeners were thrown into a frenzy of terror when they mistook a war drama for fact during a broadcast by Orson Welles. The mythical air invasion gave America a taste of war jitters.
I'm, of course, surprised that the H.G. Wells classic, which is the original for many fantasies about invasions by mythical monsters from the planet Mars. I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
Yeah, he does not recover from this. He's traumatized for life. He may have done some more radio work, but he just this messed him up pretty good. He feels very guilty for the people who did not realize that it was fake. All right, so some other stuff FDR is going to be responsible for is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. All right, so the FDIC comes out, and this is still around today. The Glass-Steagall Act insured your money up to about $5,000. The FDIC insures your money up to $100,000. All right. Actually, I think somebody told me last year or so it has now been bumped to $200,000. What that means is if you have $150,000 in your checking account and your bank just closes, the United States government will give you $150,000. Like, it's insured by the United States government. That's what the FDIC does. If you have $10 million in a checking account and your bank closes, the FDIC only insures it up to $200,000. You only get $200,000 back. And you're like, what? That's bull crap. Yeah, well, that's why when you're super rich, hopefully y'all all have to experience this this extra work. When you're super rich and you have millions and millions of dollars, you typically need to have a like an accountant, somebody to take care of your money. So like you'd have to break that up in a bunch of individual accounts because each account is insured up to a certain amount. We're invested in other stuff. But you know what they say, mo money, mo problems. Mr. Wagstaff's hilarious. But seriously, the FDIC does a great job of increasing the insurance on these banks at the time. The Security and Exchange Committee, this is the one, the Federal Securities Act gets strengthened with this, regulates trade in the stock market. I don't know if you guys know who Martha Stewart is or not. She's a homemaker. She's like cooking shows and stuff. Again, showing my age. So Martha Stewart got arrested and got sent to prison. This is like the least likely person you would ever imagine going to prison, because what she had done is she had done some insider trading, meaning she knew stock was getting ready to go down and she owned some of that stock, and then she sold it before she should have, like, and made a profit off of it. You're like, oh, all right. She went to prison, like prison. First time she'd ever committed a crime in her life, she went to prison for that. The SEC is the one who sent her to prison. They don't play. You don't mess with the stock market. After what happened in the Great Depression, they do not play. There is nothing shady that can go on with the stock market because that is why I told you at the beginning of this unit that what happens here can't happen again because it is so strictly regulated. All the things that caused the stock market to collapse and lead to the Great Depression can't happen the same way again. Not saying we can't have another depression, not saying the stock market can't collapse, but it can't happen the same way again. Thanks in large part to stuff like the Security and Exchange Committee. Let's see what we got here.
And with the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, which provided federal insurance for bank depositors, Americans began to cautiously trust the banks once more.
Because again, you have to have people put their money in the bank so the banks can take that money and loan it out to other people. They just have to have some oversight and be trustworthy. And if you have anybody who lived through the Great Depression, that is not uncommon for those people when they pass, for their families to be going through their house and just find like shoe boxes with $30,000 in it, because there is like a lot of people just never trust the bank again. Once you lose everything in the banks one time, a lot of people are like, nah, ain't gonna do it. Don't worry about that. All right. Some of the other stuff that comes out is the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. So if people go on strike now, as we had talked about John L. Lewis with the coal strike back in the last unit, that one of the most important things to do when a strike happens is open communication. The United States government now facilitates that with the National Labor Relations Board. They don't pick sides when a strike happens, but they get together. The United States government shows up at a strike and makes sure to the best of their ability that the two sides continue to talk until the strike is over. Because if they stop talking, nothing but violence and bad things happen after that. So that is also created in the New Deal. And then there's still places in America that no matter what FDR does, he cannot find a way to fix them or to help them. So what FDR does is he pinpoints these locations, and typically most of them are in like the Tennessee Valley, the poorest parts of Tennessee. It's called the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, and he finds the poorest areas and he has a dam built there. Because who's he copying? Hoover. He realized Hoover, when he built the Hoover Dam, brought that whole area out of the Great Depression because it provides electricity, keeps the land from flooding, which increases property value, and just you have to pay the people in the region to build it so it helps them out and they have money. FDR, basically the really poor places that he couldn't touch with any other policies that he had created with the New Deal, creates the Tennessee Valley Authority because a lot of these areas are in Tennessee, and he builds dams in Tennessee to give people jobs and increase property value to start pinpointing people who really need help in the Great Depression. This is a picture of the Norris Dam in Tennessee. These are the Norris Dam workers. All right. And we'll get here.
Meanwhile, the Tennessee Valley Authority was organized to build dams that provided electricity, flood control, and of course many jobs for poor farmers in several southern states.
Alrighty, that is it. So that is all the notes that we're going to have for Unit 4.